Thank you, Hiram and Jack, for that song. Would you join me in prayer before I start? Heavenly Father, I just want to ask that you'll be with me as I speak and help me give this message. And pray that we'll stay faithful to you in these end times. Amen. I'm just going to wait a second for the... Okay, there's the slides. They're up here, yeah. I've been thinking a lot recently about our faith and what it really means to be religious in these end times. Been wondering about what our mission is and what is the point of us even being here. It seems like for a long time I've been just sort of hearing like the same thing over and over again. And it seems like the war has changed. The battleground has changed. We're not fighting about the same things we were back in 1844. For those of you who don't know, the church basically started in 1844. It didn't become the Seventh-day Adventist Church until 1863. But the war basically started then between Protestants and Seventh-day Adventists and other people that call themselves Christians. We split, I would say, at that date. It's a critical date. It's a critical date in Bible prophecy, according to the book of Daniel. And it was fought over the word. It was fought over what's in here. But it seems like nowadays, the battle is taking place over things much more elemental than what's in here. No one even really knows what's in here anymore. People don't even know if they're a man or a woman anymore. So the fight seems to have changed in a lot of ways. We're fighting over things that have just never been an issue before. And in my studies, and just through my journey in life, I think a lot of times it's easy to become educated by your peers and become educated by the internet and not really have any idea about what you believe because you've never been forced to confront the facts. And I feel like in a lot of disciplines that go outside of the Bible, and what I mean by that is there are things in the Bible that are crystal clear. And then there's other issues that are not addressed so specifically. One of those is economics. Economics, there's no Adam Smith in the Bible. You'll have to look and find and search those kind of free market ideas if you want to find them. There's even things in the Bible that seem to promote socialism. You know, some people have taken some passages to say this is the idea of socialist government here. But if the Bible is true through and through, and I believe it is, I think that what we believe in these other matters, in these other side disciplines like economics or psychology or biology, there is an absolute truth out there to every single one of these things. And I don't feel personally free to just believe whatever economic idea that I want just because, it suits me. I think that there is an actual empirical fact. I remember being younger, and like I said, educated by the news and the internet and things that were around me, and being very pro-socialist ideas. I wouldn't say that I was a socialist. I didn't even really know what that meant. But I definitely supported socialistic campaigns. I remember I did my undergraduate thesis on the benefits of having a socialized medical care, because this was back in the days when Obama was running and pushing forward Obamacare. And I thought that was a great thing. What you don't realize is that if you have socialized medicine, at least what I didn't realize and what I didn't think about, I never drew this connection back then. If you have socialized medicine, then you have the right, they say, to have health care. What they don't tell you is that someone has to be forced to provide that right for you. That's the other side of the equation. If you have the right to have health care, then someone has the obligation to provide health care for you for free. without you having to pay for it. There's another name for that, and that's called slavery. What I'm going to do today is try to talk about why I believe free market ideas are the way to go, and what the Bible supports, and what we have a history of believing, and why it's important. And I'm going to touch on things that are like very commonly spoken about in the right-left debate today in politics, but I feel like what I'm talking about is different, because I'm taking a different angle on it because of Adventist ideas about prophecy, particularly what we just read in Revelation 13:12, which says all the world, wondered after the beast, the deadly wound was healed. Those are things that have happened in the past. They're still happening, they're still in the process of unfolding. But Revelation 13:12 says that there's going to be another beast rising up out of the earth, which is going to do all the same things that the first beast before him and cause everyone to worship him. Revelation 13:12 and 13, yeah. That's where you'll find those words. And believe it or not, the Catholic Church is the oldest living socialistic structure that's ever existed. A lot of people don't think that, because the Catholic Church makes a lot of pretenses of supporting capitalism or free markets or private property ownership, but they never actually do so they always do so in a qualified sense, which means you have limited ownership to private property. And I'll even go further and say that there's virtually no difference between Catholics and communists. The only thing that's different between a Catholic and a communist is the quote-unquote aversion to religion in communists, and perhaps the way you get to communism. Because communists, if you're a Marxist communist, you believe that the way to get to communism is through violent revolution and overthrow of the bourgeois and an uprising of the proletariat. But Catholics believe pretty much the same thing. It's just that they don't out and out support atheism. Maybe a lot of them are atheists up at the highest levels. And that was my experience from going to Catholic school, that you didn't really find many people that really believe the Bible the way that we believe the Bible. They believe it in a totally different way. They approach it in a very secular way. And I should know, because I went to a Catholic college and that was my experience with people that I met, priests and brothers and so forth. This quote is from an author that I really like, Thomas Sowell, who writes about a lot of these issues. Socialism in general has a record of failure so blatant that only an intellectual could ignore or evade it. I like this quote because it really gets at where the support from socialism mainly comes from. It's generally from the intelligentsia, the people up at the top, and generally the people that have never actually dealt with a market before in their lives. The people the most far removed from free markets are generally the greatest supporters of socialism. People who have never run a business before, people that have just been in ivory towers their whole lives. People that actually have experience with markets generally aren't socialists. Although Adam Smith did say that one of the greatest opposers of free markets are capitalists, or are people that own businesses, which I could talk about later, why he said that, but it is interesting that he did. I believe that the debate about where the jumping off point is between socialist people that support socialist ideas or interventionism in the free market generally comes from this idea. Things aren't fair, okay? The economy isn't fair. You have less than some other people. When you were a kid, someone hit you and beat you up and kept you down. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that you were bullied. It wasn't fair that you weren't born the son of Andrew Carnegie and some other people were. But where the difference between socialists and capitalists comes in is that free marketers. I would call them free market. Capitalists, if I could go on a tangent for a second, the term capitalist is a pejorative term that was come up by the enemies of free markets, namely Marx and other people. So I don't think that, even free marketers today, they call themselves capitalists. But the word itself connotates an obsession with something that isn't the focus of people that are capitalists at all. They were called capitalists by their enemies because they were supposedly only focused on making money at the exclusion of helping other people. But that is not what I believe capitalism is, and I don't think capitalism is a good term. I think a better term is free market or liberal. And I don't mean liberal in the modern sense of the word. The word liberal has gone through a transformation throughout the century. I mean liberal in like the 19th century sense of the word liberal. Those were the people that supported, the liberals in the 19th century supported break off from monarchy, Republican forms of governments, democracies, and free market ideas. Today, the word liberal means the word liberal basically means you're a Democrat or on the left or something like that. But that's not the traditional sense of the word liberal. It's been hijacked and means something totally different. I mean liberal more in like the Milton Friedman sense of the word. So, like I was saying, back to what I was talking about. Capitalism, I believe, is not a good term for what I believe in. Capitalism really just means you have a love for freedom. You like freedom. You want to be free. You don't want someone else telling you what to do with your business money or where it should be spent. On the other hand, socialists believe in the virtues of planning. They believe in the virtues of higher education, that there's a set of people that can arise above the conservative ideas of the past and make better decisions for you with your money than you can with yours. So they believe in controlling it. And so they approach this problem, capitalists, free marketers, and socialists, in very different ways. The idea that things aren't fair to a socialist means the government needs to get in there and do something about it. For instance, if there's a wealthy person, like Bill Gates or Elon Musk, the government needs, you'll often hear in the news, why does this billionaire have so much money when there's people out there who are poor and homeless? The government should come in and repossess his wealth and redistribute it according to something that's more fair, okay? When the real reason why Elon Musk has so much money and a homeless person doesn't is because one worked hard and the other didn't. Oftentimes that's the case. So socialists, in essence, legalize theft, stealing from people that are the most productive in society and giving it to those that have contributed virtually nothing. And that's not the case for all homeless people, but I'm just taking two extreme examples because that's the most commonly referred to examples that are out there today. And I would say on average it's correct. On the other hand, the free marketer would approach this problem about things not being fair in society, that the idea of government intervention would deprive someone of liberty. And to a free marketer or a liberal, other people's liberty is a quintessential value. You can never deprive someone of their liberty if you're a liberal. That is like the golden goose. That's everything about this country that makes it great, is that we have freedom from tyranny in this place, in this country. And so we recognize that things are not fair, that we weren't born with a perfect distribution of advantages. It wasn't born completely equal, but we can work hard in other ways and overcome those difficulties. And that's the free market approach. Winston Churchill said that socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its inherent virtue is the equal sharing of misery, which is the problem that happens with socialism, is that it doesn't, as people would like to think, bring everyone up. Instead, it makes everybody poor, which always happens. There was this funny example in like the 1830s when someone decided, and back when there was lots of land and you could move and try things, you know, like the Mormons just went and took over Utah because they could do that because there was virtually no one there. Well, someone tried to implement a socialist state in the middle of the United States. And so you had this great idea where everyone would share everything equally. There'd be communal raising of kids. Everyone would contribute. There'd be free education. There would be no more paying for food. Everyone would raise their own food and vegetables and share it all equally. And so they went out there and moved it and established this socialist colony. And what the hardest working people that moved there realized was that there was no point to working because there was a bunch of people that weren't doing any work at all. And so they stopped working. And then there was no private property, so people could just come in and share and take whatever was yours and just move into your house if they wanted to. And so people got so mad about that that they complained to this guy, and the guy eventually, while his place was falling down, reinstated private property ownership because it didn't work. And it was too late. The colony just dissolved and everyone left, and there was nothing left to this guy's socialist utopia. Everyone just went down. It just completely collapsed. And this should remind you of the failure of the Soviet Union, which did basically the same thing. When Lenin took over, after the October Revolution, he instituted his ideas, the ideas of Marxism, got rid of private property ownership, and the country went into one of the most horrible collapses that's ever existed on the face of the earth. It failed so much that he had to bring back capitalistic ideas like the ownership of private property. It's exactly the same thing that happened in the 1830s. He just thought he'd fail again and try it again. So that's why socialism is a philosophy of failure. It's the creed of ignorance. It sounds good. It sounds good to not have to work and everyone not having to worry about money anymore. Yeah, you won't be worrying about money because you'll be starving. That's the problem. And the gospel of envy. People don't like that Elon Musk has $1 billion because they want $1 billion. It's not because they want to help you. You know, the government isn't all enthusiastic about socialism because it wants to redistribute wealth to you. It wants to redistribute wealth to itself first, and then if there's anything left, you might get a few pennies. It doesn't make sense to me how you being in charge of your life is worse than a selfish person being in charge of your life. Selfishness and envy and greed don't go away just because they work for the government. The market system has a way of dealing with bad eggs. It's to drive them out of business. When someone is in charge of a company that's doing bad things, people don't go there anymore. It's the power of the internet. We can take away these people's businesses by depriving them of market share. In the government, you can't do that. Ronald Reagan said that there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program or government establishment. Whenever the COVID rules, when are those ever going to go away? Are they ever? Are we ever going to go back to a time when, we don't have to think about the COVID vaccine or the mask or anything like that? I just went and visited Ronald Reagan Library just the other day. And this is kind of ironic. If you know anything about Ronald Reagan was like a champion of free market ideas and capitalism, right? I went to the Ronald Reagan Library and you had to wear a mask through the whole museum. It's like, have you not woken up Ronald Reagan Museum and seen the rest of the world isn't wearing masks anymore? And that these never worked? They never have worked, never will work, never going to work? I guess not. Because it's, like I said, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. And the government loves to jump onto crises to start implementing its temporary programs, which are never going to go away because government bureaucrats love to be seen as doing something, even if it doesn't work. It doesn't matter if they don't work. They can always point back and say, see, I did something. And then they can just manipulate statistics or fudge them so that they look like they did something. And then in debates, they say, I did this. And it doesn't matter if you're hurt in the process. That doesn't matter to them. The only political calculus that goes into it is votes. And as long as they can manipulate things to make it look like they're like something was done, that's what they'll do. Now, I want to bring in the Catholic connection because I found it astounding that there's virtually no difference between communist, Marxist ideas and Catholic ideas. And the idea of communism is, millennia old. And as a matter of fact, if you're familiar with the writings of the Great Controversy and Ellen White, I believe that the ideas about socialism and this battle that's been going on, goes back all the way to there. Goes all the way back to the first war in heaven. I could do a message about this entirely, but if you read carefully in Great Controversy and look with this lens, this economic lens on things that happened in heaven, that we know that happened from Ellen White's writings, you'll see that what was one of Satan's primary concerns? It wasn't fair. Yes, it wasn't fair that Christ was permitted into the councils with the Father and he wasn't. And so his great idea was to spread dissension throughout the entire universe about envy, about how it wasn't right that all the angels weren't as exalted. And he went and he said, I have a more fair idea for a just government. And because of those ideas, he was cast out, and ever since he's been diffusing his envy to people on the earth. So I believe that these ideas go all the way back to that. Let me just read a few of these points here and get through, because I have a lot of slides. I already know I'm not going to make it, because I've been talking a long time. I don't even know when I started. I wish I did. Can someone give me a time estimate? Okay. Okay. So. Okay. Yeah. I won't keep you here. I won't keep you here forever. All right. So I'm going to get through a few of these points here. The Catholic ideas, like I said, go back a long time. Go back ages. Whenever they go back to times to the earliest times that Catholics have written down about their thoughts. The earliest church fathers wrote about these kind of things. It goes back a long time. So Catholic thoughts about economics are based on the church fathers, anti-crematistic views. And remember last week, or last time I was here and spoke, we learned that word. That word meant against the making of money. That's what it meant. So views in combination, especially with St. Thomas Aquinas' writings on economics. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote more in the century of 1000 something. St. Thomas Aquinas adopted Aristotle's ideas on the law, putting private property into the category of positive law. If you remember last time, Aristotle had broken down the law to divine law, eternal law, natural law, and positive law. St. Thomas Aquinas follows exactly in the footsteps of the Greeks and doesn't reason from the Bible. Instead, he reasons from Greek philosophical thought. And he makes the Bible agree with Aristotle, as opposed to the other way around, making Aristotle agree with the Bible. So he's using the wrong source. And that's why he gets led into error. And what was the consequence of putting private property in the positive law? Positive law are things that are made by men. And if they're made by men, they can change. This isn't like the law of the Medes and the Persians that can never change. Things made by men can change. Eternal law, divine law, natural law. You can't change gravity, and you can't change God's 10 commandments. It doesn't work. Okay, but the positive law, things made by men, those can change. And so if you put private property in there, then you only have private property in a very qualified way. You only have private property as men define it. So private property can be subject to redefinition and change, which is exactly what they did. And this leads to all kinds of strange moralizing about how private property works in Catholic thought. So here's a couple of interesting cases where I can pull out text from St. Thomas Aquinas' writings and show exactly how it leads to contradictions, at least with our viewpoint. The possession of all things in common and universal freedom are said to be of the natural law because, to wit, the distinction of possessions and slavery were not brought in by nature but devised by human reason for the benefit of human life. So human reason came up with the ideas about private property ownership, but the possession of all things in common, that's natural law. So communism is natural, and private property ownership is not natural. I guess, and like I said, they're probably missing in the 10 Commandments where God put in there, thou shalt not steal, and you can't have that commandment unless there's private property. It doesn't make sense. In cases of need, all things are common property, so that there would seem to be no sin in taking another's property, for need has made it common. There's, again, getting rid of the commandment, thou shalt not steal, in that text alone. These are writings from St. Thomas Aquinas. But modern popes say the same thing. St. Thomas Aquinas isn't some Catholic hack, that no one pays attention to anymore. St. Thomas Aquinas is the basis of Catholic canon law. So people really pay attention to what St. Thomas Aquinas says. Popes have gone on record saying that there's no more eminent philosopher in the Catholic Church than St. Thomas Aquinas. So people really listen to him. Of course, Pope John Paul was loved by the world. In 1987, he said this in an encyclical on social concern. Private property, in fact, is under a social mortgage, which is another word or way of saying socialism, which means that it has an intrinsically social function based upon and justified precisely by the principle of the universal destination of goods. All other rights whatsoever, including those of property and of free commerce, are to be subordinated to this principle. Therefore, the Catholic Church is clearly anti-capitalistic. And nothing's changed since 1987. Nothing's changed since the Church Fathers wrote those anti-crematistic things back when they wrote them, or like I said, St. Thomas Aquinas. Here's like a little bit of review of economic history. I think I did last time. The Catholic Church is directly responsible for the ignorance and lack of progress during the Dark Ages because of their views that making money was sinful. People avoided this. Materialism was a sign of sins of the flesh, so anything that supported the flesh's wants or desires was viewed as evil. And that's why they had these roaming monks, of mendicant monks and orders of the Catholic Church that disdained work. Instead, they thought that they should be given largesse by the community at large, and that they shouldn't work, because if they were working, they weren't praying. They had this idea of the thesaurus ecclesiae, which is the idea that chants and prayers made up for the sins of people, and that that's why Catholics do that. They go to church and pray because every prayer is contributing to the thesaurus ecclesiae. A lot of Latin today. Not used to it. So the more prayers they give, like just random prayers, it doesn't matter if their heart's in or not, just like prayers and chanting and all this stuff that they're doing, is building up this treasury of good works which they can distribute to other people. That's what they believe, and that's why they do that. So they need to spend all their time doing this while you sinful people are out working for potatoes or whatever you do, okay? But they can't be bothered with work, because they need to pray and do all this stuff. Protestant Reformation changed all those ideas. They taught profit was sinful, working merchants were sinful, trading for money was sinful. The church enforced a guild system which restricted entry to trades, so that you couldn't be a blacksmith unless you were part of the blacksmith guild, which is very similar to things like the AMA or these other like restrictive things today where you're not allowed to be a doctor unless you go through licensed paths and all this kind of stuff. So it just basically drives costs up and makes everything more expensive and worse. The church also didn't believe in any private property or a middle class. Well, they didn't have a middle class because there was just basically two classes. There was a large lower class of serfs and a few lords. This period saw the development of almost no significant technological change. Can you imagine that? There's a famous law, I think it's Moore's law, it's a law of computer engineering that was saying basically that the processor was doubling in speed with a square of time, or I don't know, every basically year. Every year it would double in speed. Yeah, the CPU would double in speed until it eventually leveled off, and then we're going to need to do a quantum computer or something to get any like significant power. But anyways, that's what's been happening recently. I mean, with the amount of inventions that we've seen through technology lately, and for 1,000 years nothing happened that's worth writing about. That's incredible. Okay, that's direct consequence of bad policy, and that's why policy matters. So 1,000 years, nothing happened. Although some economic historians trying to save face for the Catholic Church probably regard the three-field system of crop rotation, an improvement upon the two-field system, as being a major technical innovation of the Middle Ages. Okay. So what brought civilization out of the Dark Ages? It was the Protestant Reformation. And when people started to read the Bible for themselves, they became literate, and then they got interested in other things that God did, like physics and all these things. So that's what led to the ending of the Dark Age. The Protestant Reformation made man self-reliant as opposed to reliant on a church structure to provide for him his needs from cradle to grave, which is exactly what the socialist state promises you. You will be provided everything you need from the day you're born to the day you die. The government will take care of you. You don't have to work. You don't have to be innovative. You don't have to be creative. You can just rely on the socialist state to do everything for you. It's basically a lazy man's way out. You will never try to be better. There's no point. You can't go up. You can't go down. You're just in this state, of being taken care of forever. However, the Protestant Reformation made man self-reliant. Reliant, first of all, for his own salvation and reading the Bible and understanding it for himself, and secondly, to provide for himself, because doing what the Catholics did and going around begging for food was a complete waste of time and of no value to anyone. So you needed to work your way. The Bible says the same thing. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And they took that to everything. If you read the Proverbs, you can't come away from reading the Proverbs feeling that laziness is the right way to go. There's no way. Diligent man will stand before kings. That's what the Bible says. The Protestant Reformation is responsible for republican forms of government because no one wanted to have another, and when we started, I say we, I wasn't really there, but when the country was founded, people did not want to go back to the times of the Dark Ages when the church and state were combined and you couldn't believe what you wanted to do because the state told you that that was wrong. But today we have this happening in this country. If you believe something different from the government these days on a critical issue, it's now misinformation or Russian disinformation. It's just like, what is that? And it's not just labeled as misinformation, but it is actively persecuted, taken down, and removed from circulation. And you better believe that Protestants and people that are true to the Bible, that believe in the Bible, are in the crosshairs of the government right now. You, me, and you are terrorists, basically, in the government's eyes. The current things going on inside the FBI and the Department of Defense are to relabel white nationalists, which just, people that are, the umbrella term white nationalist has now encompassed people that are Bible-believing Christians. And it just happens by random fact that most of us are white or come from a white background. It wasn't like, we picked our race or something like that. It just happens that most of the people in the United States are white. And our church is very serious about the Bible and believing every word of it. And that is a dangerous threat in the government's eyes. Because the Bible teaches that we should be free and that we should make up our own minds. But the government does not want you to make up your own mind. Because look at what happens when you make up your own mind. You vote in someone like Trump or something like that. We can't have that again. That's what the government says. So they do not want you to have the freedoms that are promised in the Constitution. Okay, so the history of economics, I would briefly break down into these 4 stages, roughly. The Dark Ages, the Protestant Reformation, which led to the Industrial Revolution, and then what comes after that. What comes after that is an interesting time. It's the modern period. The modern period has seen a lot of different things in terms of economic ideas. You have, in this period of question marks, you have people splitting on Marxist ideas and going that direction, and you have a split of people going in liberal ideas. So like I said, during the Dark Ages, absolutely nothing happened. Many regarded business and commerce as evil. The first person to notice that something amazing was happening as a result of the Protestant Reformation was Adam Smith, and he wrote down his ideas in the book Wealth of Nations and his other book on the inquiry of morals, social morals or something like this. In this, he comes up with his famous idea about the invisible hand. See, the Catholic Church has always been obsessed with reforming people from the top down, changing your bad nature into being something good. On the flip side, free marketers have the idea that this is human nature, to human nature is sinful, but we can give incentives for the wrong people to do the right thing. And that's a critical difference. Instead of the government forcing you to be good through laws, which will never change the man from the inside out, they will just add to the corpus of laws that are out there. Free market ideas make the wrong people do the right thing. Okay? And this is the idea of the invisible hand. And the invisible hand idea is, I'll read it to you. This is Adam Smith's own word from Wealth of Nations. By preferring the support of domestic to that of foreign industry, he intends only his own security. Okay, you might think that that's greedy or selfishness or something. And by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention, nor is it always the worse for the society that it was not part of it. By pursuing his own interests, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. Okay, that's the fundamental difference. Socialists would believe that those who are out to promote the good, if they intend to promote good things, will promote good things because they intend it. Okay, that was the intention of the welfare state. That was the intention of all these myriad government programs. They all had great intentions of ending poverty. That's what Lyndon Johnson said. We're going to wage a war on poverty, take from the haves and give to the have-nots. Okay, good intentions, but it did nothing to end poverty. And on the contrary, you can look to the implementations of those policies as the degradation of the United States, which started in 1960s. Okay? So, if you, on the other hand, incentivize bad people to do right things because, people tragically are fallen. If you do that, then they will do the right things because they're incentivized by their love of money or whatever to do the right thing. And that's what happens with the invisible hand. It's making the wrong people do the right thing as opposed to trying to change people's behavior, which you can never do. And frequently, probably, as a result of doing the right thing, people are probably converted. Okay. I'm just looking at the time. Half an hour. Okay. Take a little bit more time. I'm going to talk about the anti-capitalist reaction in the 1800s. So, like I said, Adam Smith writes his book 1700s. He writes his book, Wealth of Nations. His ideas have a big impact on Scotland and England and the opening up and repealing of tariffs, restrictions on trade, all kinds of things like this, which were hampering that region of the world for a long time and holding it back, which saw a great increase of prosperity in Western Europe because of the embracing of free market ideas. However, because because things were transitioning, things were not always working out perfectly in the beginning. This left a point of contention for people who had Marxist and socialist ideas. And this is when Marx was born. And Marx wrote a lot of his books right around the same time that Ellen White was writing her books in the mid-1800s. So Marx argued that capitalists, there was like the robber baron idea, that capitalists were exploiting workers and that workers were the only source of value. So the Marxist theory of labor is very important to Marxists to know, so you should know this. The value of a commodity can be objectively measured by the average number of labor hours required to produce that commodity. So that means that you can, basically the workers deserve all the credit for making whatever they make. No credit goes due to the person the entrepreneur, or the person that took all the risk in starting a company and risked going broke or bankrupt or losing everything. He doesn't do anything. Marx would say that his value added to the whole thing was merely clerical, meaning he wasn't much more valued than a clerk doing paperwork. Okay, but that's clearly not how things go. The great companies that we've seen developed in this country, like Hewlett-Packard and Intel and IBM, those companies are nothing without the influence of the people at the top. So I think that that's objectively wrong to measure things about the labor hours that go into it, as opposed to how much capital increases the productivity of labor. And you cannot divorce from the equation capital and how important capital is. The socialists would like to and say that everything belongs to the worker. So that, I think, is totally wrong. You could imagine building a car, for instance, by hand, okay? And that means you got to dig up all the metal, you got to go out with a shovel, or you don't even get a shovel, you got to use your hands to get the metal out of the rocks. And, imagine doing all that stuff versus a car made by a machine. Now, which one do you think would be more valuable, the one made by the machine or the one made by hand? Now, don't measure things by how hard they were or how long it took. Do you think a car that someone dug out by hand, he's like breaking rocks and having to precision machine the pistons and the cylinders with his hand, could ever match a car made by machines and robots and the things today? The car wouldn't even work, okay? But by the Marxist theory of labor, he spent way more time doing it, so therefore it should be more expensive, or he should get more, benefit or profit from that. It doesn't make sense. I heard a story about a guy who decided to make a toaster, so completely by hand with no tools and everything. Like, he was even going to dig his own metal up, and so it took him like a few years to make this toaster, and it worked one time and then fizzled out and broke. That's what happened to that. So obviously, capital increases the productivity of labor. There's no even measuring it, 1,000-fold, how much capital increases labor. So Marx got that completely wrong by saying that labor is the only source of value. So the world goes into two different directions after the 1840s. You can see, like over here, the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe decides to follow Marxist ideas while Western Europe remains open to free market ideas. Subtract Spain, and that's pretty much it, because Spain was kind of like experimenting with fascism and control from the top down during the Franco regime for a long time. And if you look at Europe today, you can almost exactly see which countries are poor in terms of GDP per capita and which countries are wealthy. Even with Spain. Spain is one of the poorest countries in the European Union, along with Greece and Portugal. They're pretty far down there, so they're not the power countries like France and West Germany is, or Germany is. So that's what happens to the world. Let's see here. And how did that experiment turn out with experimenting with capitalism? Experimenting with socialism. Here you have a picture of a market, typical market in Russia during the Soviet Union's heyday. And you can see there's nothing in there. There's no food, okay? And this was all due to the wisdom of top-down planning. These people that were planning the government and planning where all the food should be distributed, this is how they were doing. There was no food. There was no food there during that time. Here's a market in the United States, okay? And there's no planning. No one planned that. People working out their own best interests got all these apples, pears, and all these things onto the shelves. This is a funny picture, one that I really like. Do you know who that is? Anyone? This is Boris Yeltsin coming to tour the United States when Reagan was president. And you can see him there looking like, whoa, look at it. He can't believe it. There's actually food in the supermarket. And there's not just food, there's a lot of food there. So this is what a market in the United States looked like, and this is what one in Russia looked like. Okay, which one would you rather shop at? And Yeltsin came to the United States after the Soviet Union had fell, and he realized that communism was not working. It was a tremendous failure. People were starving. And he came to kind of get a glimpse of what was going on in the United States, because no Russian had really been to the United States except for spies and stuff like that. So he wanted to see for himself what was it like there. And he asked Reagan for a tour, and they took him Reagan asked to take him to one of the biggest shopping marts in Texas, I think it was. And they took him in there, and he went in there, and he was amazed. He couldn't believe how much food was in there. As a matter of fact, after his tour, he went and asked one of the people that he was touring with, and he said, so do the people that run this store get advanced PhD degrees to run this store? He couldn't believe that this all just happened by people that, had just no education necessarily, no advanced planning. In the Soviet Union, markets and And food distribution was run by the most intelligent economists in the Soviet Union. And there was two of them in particular who wrote about after the collapse what things were like. They could not keep up with the amount of work. They had to set prices for millions of different items individually. And if they set the price too high for one of these million items, it would cause backlogs of things that depended on that one item. And so, for instance, there was one time when millions and millions of beaver pelts were accumulating in warehouses because they set the price of those too high, so everyone in Russia went out and killed every single beaver and sold it to the government. And all these pelts just deteriorated because they had no use for them. Obviously, what should have happened is prices should have fallen. And that would have equalized out the demand for beaver pelts. And there wouldn't have been this huge lack or this huge glut of beaver. So, why I chose this quote, right, from the Bible, is that we've seen how the Catholic Church directly supports communist ideas and socialist ideas. They've had their time with it. They controlled the whole area in Europe and further than that as well. And it didn't work. It failed, and they went into the Dark Ages. But the Bible says that there's a second stage coming. He said that he, here in Revelation 13:12, he exercises all the power of the first beast before him. This is the second beast coming up out of the earth, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. Okay. So there's going to be another trial, and he's going to do all the same things that the first beast before him did. Okay? And he's not going to forget economics. It's not going to be like a total radical different situation. It's going to be the same exact thing. Okay? So, since communists believe in central planning, the United States, I believe, is going to try the same thing. Here in this encyclical, you kind of see the marching orders of the church here, of the Catholic Church here. This was written quadragesimo anno, and it says, in fact, the encyclical Rerum Novarum completely overthrew those tottering tenets of liberalism which had long hampered effective interference by the government. So, in the 1880s, when Rerum Novarum was written, it was a critique on free markets. And it was very popular within the Catholic Church. And it worked. The ideas inside that encyclical worked. And as a matter of fact, this Pope here, who's writing Quadragesimo Anno, says that the encyclical completely overthrew liberalism, which is bad news for us, because those ideas of liberalism kept government out of our lives. Liberalism had hampered effective interference by the government. However, because of this encyclical Rerum Novarum, it is now, there's no such separation. So what I would talk about probably next time, because now it's time to stop, would be what happened because of the adoption of the tenets of Rerum Novarum. What happened in the United States? And I think it's a pretty fascinating story. It has to do with two particularly prominent Catholic politicians. I'll show you the pictures. I think my battery's dying or something. Gibbons and Ryan. Ryan became a member of FDR's cabinet. And it's pretty amazing the things that they wanted, they got. I'm really having trouble with my slide changer. Yeah, the New Deal being one of them. But these are the things that Ryan wanted. Ryan wanted a legally mandated 8-hour workday, restrictions of labor of women and children, the legalization of picketing during strikes, compulsory arbitration in labor disputes, state employment bureaus, unemployment insurance, legally mandated accident, sickness, and old age insurance, public housing programs, government ownership of natural monopolies, graduated income taxes, graduated inheritance taxes, And all of those things, to some degree, we have in the United States today. And those were not part of our system before that. All the taxes, the progressive taxation, all of these things are consequences of influence of Catholic politicians in the United States. And we've gotten used to the government dictating everything that we do and them having the final say, as opposed to it being the other way around, where we have the final say. And yeah, so I have a couple of, a lot more to say about it, but that's basically the story. So I would just like to leave you with the idea that you need to take ownership for your own life. And you can't depend on the government or someone else planning your life for you. And even further than that, don't go back to some event in your childhood or some person that wronged you and say, I'm failing because of this person, because then you're letting them own you. And that's exactly, what socialists do. And it's more than just a bad economic plan. It's a bad philosophy to have in your mind, that you can't control what's going on in your own life. You and God can control, take ownership of your life, and you can have victory. Now let's have closing prayer.